I have been recommending and selling the book Wheat Belly by Dr. Davis for years because I think it explains it all very well. Well, the wheat that we eat today is not the wheat that they ate in the Bible or whatever. It is completely changed. We've changed the plant so that it develops more of that protein than it did before. Basically, there was less of the gluten in the old wheat. That's number one. Number two, we used to make breads with all types of other ingredients, namely wood ash and bone meal. These were two major mineral sources for humanity that we just don't do anymore. You do not make bread with bone meal and wood ash. Always remember Jack and the Beanstalk. Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he live or be he dead, I will grind his bones to make my bread. That's how they used to make bread. They added bone meal into it. This fortified it greatly. And just like fruit is healthier for you than processed sugar because it has all sorts of other phytonutrients that help you metabolize that sugar, when we made bread with wood ashes, which is plant-derived minerals, and bones, it was much healthier. Having those two other ingredients, there's many other ingredients that you could add into a bread, by the way, and it wasn't always rising yeast bread. Big difference between rising yeast and anything else, basically any other type of bread. When you think about it, and today's bread is basically just part flour, part sugar. Before it was a little bit of flour, which was the actual wheat, and then bigger part bone meal, bigger part wood ash, and then all this other stuff too. So there was very little wheat in it. On top of that, in the olden days, it was very hard work to make flour. You needed a mill and all this kind of stuff. So the people, including the longest lived populations, like the Huns of people and stuff, people are like, but they eat a little piece of chapati bread. They eat gluten every day. What are you talking about? And the key here is the quantity. They eat very little food overall. They eat very little wheat overall. And of course, they're making it still with wood ash and bones and whatever else they want to toss into the bread, basically. And also, processed sugar is a modern thing, right? So Nutrition and Physical Degeneration is one of my favorite resources that documented man's exposure to the white powders, which was flour and sugar, and it basically just destroyed our health immediately. So in the old days, you wouldn't have processed sugar in the bread. The fact that it has processed sugar in it usually is going to tell you that it has no nutritional value at all. A natural ingredient should have taste, even wheat. Now, the gluten is also in rye and barley, and we're also saying it's oats, because even though you see oats that are gluten-free, they have very similar compounds to gluten. I say actually that oats are worse. I say oats are for goats, and I teach that to kids, so they never go near oats. On top of that, oats and other grains are typically contaminated with gluten. They're contaminated usually in the processing, basically. So a little bit of gluten can irritate our intestines quite a lot. And this is what we call gluten intolerance, basically. It's like poison ivy on the inside of your intestines. It's an inflammation in the intestines, and the intestines are the organs that absorb nutrients. So if those get inflamed, there's less surface area to absorb nutrients. People can say, well, what if I'm not gluten intolerant? Very little chance of that. We basically consider everybody to be gluten intolerant, everybody to have some level of inflammation. Some people, they eat a little tiny bit, they're on the floor, they're running to the bathroom, they're really, really sensitive. And some people, especially in the older generation, they're going to be less sensitive to that. But the gluten protein or the gliadin protein or any of these other grain proteins are really, really tough proteins. They're almost impossible or completely impossible to break down in the stomach because amino acids are essential for us. There's 12 amino acids that are essential for us, maybe even more, and not proteins, basically. We do not need whole proteins, and it's a problem if whole proteins go into the intestines because the body is going to try and absorb them. That's the job of it. If the body absorbs full proteins, then there's a dirty blood problem. I'll put the swipe up in here for the dirty blood video because now there's whole proteins in the blood and your blood is correctly going to treat those as foreign invaders and basically attack them in an immune response. So you see, there's multiple reasons why gluten is actually bad. And finally on this is that whether or not you have an actual inflammation response, which again, you probably do, even if you don't, those gluten proteins are so tough, they will actually damage the villi in the intestine. And the intestine is basically like an inverted shag carpet with all these finger-like little villi and microvilli. Those are there to expand the surface area, so there's more surface area to absorb nutrients. If those get damaged, now you have less ability to absorb nutrients at all. This is the cause of malabsorption of many of the other nutrients, that even if you're getting all the vitamins and whatever in your diet, now you can no longer absorb them correctly because the intestines have been damaged. Now, the real kicker here is that a lot of people just plainly, simply are not going to experience any health benefit unless they get off of gluten. Most people out there, especially if you come to us with an already existing problem, chances are you have a severe gluten intolerance and you need to get off the gluten. Definitely get yourself a copy of Dr. Wallach's cookbook. This is basically a textbook about how to cook without the bad foods, particularly oil and gluten. This is 300 pages stuffed full of recipes without the bad foods that they're usually made from. And of course, make sure to check out our food page, Notice Foods, that's on YouTube, and at Notice Foods on Instagram. We have a lot of content up there teaching you how to cook without the bad foods that Dr. Wallach describes, and Dr. Glidden's 12 bad foods, all of that, all of the rules that you need to know. And we have experienced chefs and bakers who will answer the questions in those inboxes. And definitely check out my book, Fake Diseases. It covers all of the major topics that come up, like birth defects, blood sugar problems, bone and joint problems, cancer, autoimmune problems, and more. And it's on Amazon for just $9.99.